I never imagined that a simple old rag and a can of shoe polish could change the course of my life. I perfectly remember that cold afternoon, the wind blowing through the corners of Times Square, while I tried to dry the soaked shoes of the few customers who stopped in front of my little wooden box. People hurried past, their eyes glued to their cell phones, without even noticing the black girl crouching in the middle of the sidewalk, scrubbing shoes to earn a few coins and, perhaps, a sandwich at the end of the day. I used to tell myself, "One day, Naomi, God will take you away from here." But at that moment, heaven seemed as distant as the dreams I held in my heart. I was only 17, but I already knew the taste of loneliness, hunger, and fear. There was no room for fairy tales in my routine, only the stubborn hope that something, anything, would happen to change the course of my story. Before continuing, I want to say that I ask God to bless you with all His infinite love, giving you much health, peace, joy, and faith, because we can never lose faith in God, for He will never abandon us, because His love is eternal and infinite. I also take this opportunity to ask you to like the video and subscribe to the channel. This helps me a lot, thank you. That day, I was about to give up. My hands were trembling with cold, and my stomach had been growling for hours. That's when I saw a man standing in the distance, watching the rain fall on the crowd. His gray suit looked brand new, and the glint of his gold watch reflected the lights of the billboards. I thought, he'll never want me to touch his shoes. But he looked straight at me, and something in his gaze made time stand still. I didn't know it, but that moment, so simple and silent, would be the first step on a journey that would transform my life forever. The rain was beginning to intensify, and each drop that hit the sidewalk sounded like a drum marking the rhythm of my despair. People hid under umbrellas, and I, with nowhere to protect myself, pulled my worn coat over my shoulders, trying to warm myself a little. It was then that he approached, tall, elegant, with a black umbrella and a gaze so deep that it seemed to see beyond my appearance. He didn't say anything immediately. He just stood there, watching me clean another man's shoe, a man who didn't even look me in the eye when he paid me. When I finished, he bent down slightly, as if he wanted to see my face up close. That gesture disconcerted me. No rich man had ever done that before. "Do you work here every day?" he asked, his voice calm and firm. I hesitated. I didn't know if it was safe to answer. "Yes, sir," I murmured, keeping my gaze down. He nodded and extended his right foot, an expensive black leather shoe with a small mud stain on the side. As I began to clean up, I felt a lump in my throat. It was as if something invisible was happening between us, something I couldn't explain. He wasn't looking at his phone, he didn't seem rushed. He just watched me in silence, as if every movement of mine told a story. At that moment, I realized there was something different about him. It wasn't just the money, the suit, or the expensive car parked on the corner. It was the way he seemed to see beyond appearances, as if he recognized something familiar in me, perhaps the pain, perhaps the loneliness. "What's your name?" he asked. "Naomi," I replied, a little embarrassed. "Naomi," he repeated, as if savoring the sound of my name. "Beautiful name. It means pleasant, you know." I nodded, surprised. "My mother told me that once," I murmured. For a brief second, I felt like crying. It had been months since I'd heard my mother's name spoken aloud. Since she passed away, it felt like the world had erased all memories of her, except for me. The man smiled, a slight, almost sad smile. "You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago," he said. "Someone who believed in me when no one else did." I didn't know what to say. As he finished polishing the shoe, he took a folded bill from his pocket and placed it in my hand. When I looked, I almost dropped it. It was a $100 bill. "Sir, I think you've made a mistake," I said hastily. But he just smiled. "No, Naomi. Consider this a thank you for reminding me of what really matters." My heart raced. $100 was more than I earned in an entire week. I was speechless, unsure whether to thank them, run away, or cry. Then he did something even more unexpected. "Have you had dinner yet?" he asked. I laughed, thinking it was a joke. "Sir, me? Dinner? In a place like this?" He shook his head. "Not here. But if you want, I can offer you a decent dinner. Just a chat. No ulterior motives." My instincts told me to refuse. I had already learned to distrust the kindness of strangers. But there was something in his gaze, a kind of silent truth, difficult to ignore. The rain was falling harder, and he held out his umbrella over me. "Shall we go?" he asked again. I looked around. People were watching me, some laughing, others whispering. It seemed like an absurd scene, a poor, dirty girl being invited to dinner by a man who was probably worth millions. I took a step back, trying to think. What if it was a scam? What if he wanted something in return? But inside me, a soft voice, the same one that always guided me when fear surrounded me, whispered, "Trust." I took a deep breath and agreed. "All right, sir. But just dinner." He smiled again, a smile of someone who knew something I didn't yet know. "Agreed." As we walked toward the black car parked on the corner, I felt something shift inside me. I didn't know what that encounter meant, but something told me it wasn't by chance. With each step, the sound of the rain seemed to blend with the accelerated beating of my heart. And without realizing it, I was about to open the door to a destiny I could never have imagined, a destiny that began there, with a dirty shoe, a mysterious look, and a proposal that would change everything. And it was at that exact moment, as the car drove away from the lights of Times Square, that I realized my life would never be the same again. I will never forget the silence inside that car. The sound of the rain hitting the window felt like a clock marking every second of my hesitation. I watched the city go by through the window, the lights of the buildings, the hurried faces, the reflections of a life that never seemed to belong to me. Beside me, Mr. Jonathan Reed remained serene, his hands firm on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed ahead, as if he were guiding not only the car, but my destiny. I was trying to understand why he had chosen me. Among so many people, why a black girl, poor and invisible like me? I wanted to ask, but fear kept me silent. In my life, every kindness came with a price, and I still didn't know what his would be. We arrived at an elegant restaurant in Manhattan. I had never been to a place like this before. The glass doors opened automatically, and the smell of good food filled the air. When I entered, all eyes turned to me. I felt my face burn. I wanted to disappear. But Jonathan walked beside me, unconcerned by the stares. It was as if he were saying to the world, "She has the right to be here." The waiter led us to a table near the window. The tablecloths were white, the silverware gleaming in the soft candlelight. I sat down, my hands trembling, unsure if I should touch anything. Jonathan noticed my discomfort and smiled. "Don't be afraid, Naomi. You're my guest tonight." For a moment, I thought about running away. It all seemed like a trap. I remembered stories I'd heard on the streets, about good people who disappeared after accepting a dinner invitation from a stranger. But there was something in his gaze, something calm, firm, almost paternal. "Have you always worked shining shoes?" he asked, breaking the silence. I took a deep breath before answering. "Since my mother got sick. After she passed away," I continued. "It's what I know how to do." He looked at me intently, as if each of my words affected him in a way I couldn't understand. "Where is your father?" he asked next. I swallowed hard. I never met him. My mother said he was a good man, but she was afraid to stay. I think she forgave him before she died. Jonathan was silent. For a moment, I saw something in his eyes that resembled pain, an old pain, perhaps familiar. The waiter brought dinner. I didn't even know where to begin. Jonathan noticed and gently taught me how to use the cutlery without making me feel embarrassed. That disarmed me. No man had treated me with such kindness since my mother passed away. "Naomi," he said after a few minutes of light conversation, "do you believe in destiny?" The question caught me off guard. "I think so," I replied. "My mother always said that God writes straight with crooked lines." He smiled slightly. "Your mother was a wise woman." That sentence touched me deeply. For a moment, I felt like crying. Jonathan noticed and looked away, giving me space. It was as if he knew that sometimes tears need to fall in silence. "I see something in you that reminds me of myself," he said after a while. "When I was young, I also lived on the streets. I learned the value of dignity the hard way." I looked at him, surprised. That revelation seemed improbable. A billionaire from magazines saying that he too had once been a street kid? Seriously? I asked, almost in disbelief. He nodded, his eyes welling up with tears. "Yes. And if it weren't for a woman who believed in me when no one else did, I might never have gotten out of there." I felt a shiver. It was as if, suddenly, two stories separated by different worlds met at the same point. As he spoke, I noticed how the people around him looked at him, some with respect, others with envy. But I saw something they didn't. Behind the expensive suit and confident smile, there was a man carrying a past as heavy as my own. Jonathan told me about his childhood in Ohio, about the nights in shelters, about the skin-biting cold, and the promises he made to himself that he would never go hungry again. "Naomi," he said firmly, "I learned that God uses simple people to perform miracles. Today, I believe He put you in my path for a reason." Those words echoed within me. I wanted to believe, but life had already taught me to distrust miracles. Even so, a spark of hope ignited in my heart. As dinner was drawing to a close, Jonathan looked at me with an expression I'll never forget. It was the look of someone who saw not only who I was, but who I could become. And, in that instant, I realized that something inside him was changing too. As we left the restaurant, the cold night wind enveloped me like a reminder that reality was still there, waiting for me. He opened the car door, and before I got in, he said something that sent a chill down my spine. "Naomi, tomorrow I want to show you something. Something that could change your life." I was speechless. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, trying to understand. He just smiled mysteriously. "You'll find out tomorrow." On the way back, I kept looking at his reflection in the glass. There was something about that man, a mixture of sadness and purpose, that I couldn't decipher. And, deep down, a question began to haunt me. Who was Mr. Jonathan Reed, really? When the car stopped in front of the sidewalk where I used to sleep, he turned to me and said, "Never forget, Naomi. A person's worth is not in what they have, but in what they do with what they have." He smiled, handed me a gold card with his number on it, and left. I stood there, in the rain, holding that piece of paper as if it were a key. Little did I know that, the next day, that key would open the door to a world I had never imagined, and a secret that would change everything I believed about faith, destiny, and forgiveness. I spent the night awake. The golden card lay on my torn blanket, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mr. Reed's face and that look that seemed to pierce my soul. The rain stopped, but the honking, the cold, and the fear of what was to come kept me awake. Deep down, something inside me told me that this encounter hadn't been just a coincidence. It was a calling. But a calling for what? When the sun rose, I got up and tried to fix my hair in front of the dirty reflection of a shop window. The card was still in my hands. I thought about throwing it away, like someone trying to get rid of a temptation. But my mother's voice echoed in my memory, "When God opens a door, Naomi, don't be afraid to walk in." I sighed deeply and decided to call. "Mr. Reed." My voice came out trembling, almost a whisper. On the other end, he replied in a serene tone, "Naomi, it's so good to hear your voice. I was expecting you to call." He asked me to meet him in the late afternoon, in front of Central Park. "Don't worry about anything," he said. "Just come." The hours passed slowly. I walked to the park with my heart racing. There he was, the same impeccable suit, the same calm smile. But there was something new in his eyes, a mixture of expectation and tenderness. "I'm glad you came," he said, extending his hand. "I promised to show you something, remember?" I nodded, still suspicious. We followed a path surrounded by trees until he stopped in front of a wooden bench. "Sit with me, Naomi." I sat down. The wind rustled the leaves, and for a moment, everything seemed too quiet. Jonathan took an envelope from his pocket and placed it between us. "Before I show you what's inside, I need to ask you a question." I stared at him, unsure what to expect. "If you had the chance to change not only your life, but the lives of many people, would you accept, even without knowing the price?" I swallowed hard. "It depends," I replied. "It depends on what you mean by price." He smiled slightly. "Good answer." Then he opened the envelope. Inside was a sheet of letterhead with the logo of a company I had seen in the news before, Reed Enterprises. "Naomi," he said firmly, "I want you to come with me to an event tonight. I need you to accompany me as my guest." I froze. "An event? You mean a real dinner? With other people?" He nodded. Yes. It will be in a hall on the Upper East Side. Nothing to worry about. I just want you to be there. My first impulse was to refuse. I had no clothes, no suitable shoes. I didn't know how to behave. Lord, I don't belong in this world, I murmured. People will laugh at me. Jonathan leaned forward and placed his hand on mine. People laughed at me too, Naomi. But God showed me that the laughter of others never defines who we are. Those words struck me like lightning. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Why me? I asked, my voice choked with emotion. Why are you doing this? Because someone did it for me, he replied. And now it's my turn. He asked me to meet him later at a hotel, where a stylist and a hairdresser would take care of me. I wanted to laugh, to think it was a dream. But he seemed so serious, so sure, that I ended up agreeing. When the sun set, I went to the address given. The lobby was enormous, and the marble gleamed under the chandeliers. 2 women were waiting for me and led me to a room full of dresses. I had never seen anything like it. They started getting me ready, carefully combing my hair, choosing a light blue dress that fit perfectly. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize the person reflected there. For the first time, I saw myself beautiful. The driver took me to the event hall. The lights were golden, the people elegant, and the scent of expensive perfume filled the air. When I entered, everyone turned around. I almost tripped from nervousness. But then I saw him, Jonathan, smiling, coming toward me. You look beautiful, he said, offering me his arm. I could barely respond. I felt their eyes on me, some curious, others suspicious. A woman whispered something to her husband and laughed. Jonathan pretended not to notice, but squeezed my hand lightly, as if to say, "Ignore it." During dinner, he introduced me to several important people. Some greeted me politely, others just nodded coldly. I felt out of place, but Jonathan didn't leave me alone for a second. In the middle of the night, a gray-haired woman with an arrogant look approached. "Jonathan, darling," she said, "who is this young lady?" He replied without hesitation, "This is Naomi, a very special friend." The woman raised her eyebrows. "A friend, is she? And where exactly is she from?" The silence that followed was heavy. Jonathan smiled calmly. "From the same place I came from, the streets." A murmur ran through the hall. I felt like disappearing. But he kept his gaze steady, proud, as if he had just uttered something sacred. After the event, on the way back, I was speechless. Everything seemed like a distant dream. He broke the silence. "You did well." "I just stayed quiet," I replied. He laughed. Sometimes, silence speaks louder than any words. When the car stopped in front of the hotel, he looked at me seriously. "Naomi, tomorrow I want to take you somewhere. It's not a restaurant, nor an event. It's something much more important." "What place?" I asked. He took a deep breath. "The place where it all began for me." Before I could ask any more, he opened the door, smiled, and said, "Sleep well. Tomorrow the real purpose begins." I stood there, frozen on the sidewalk, the night wind ruffling my hair, unsure whether to feel fear or hope. What did he want with me? And what was in this so-called place where it all began? Something told me that the answer would be much deeper and more painful than I imagined. The following morning dawned with a biting cold and a pale sky, the kind that seems to announce something big, something that will turn the world upside down. I woke before the hotel alarm clock rang. I spent a few minutes sitting on the bed, looking at the dress hanging on the chair, still smelling of the expensive perfume from the salon. Everything that had happened seemed like a dream, but the gold card on the table was proof that it was real. Shortly before 9 o'clock, Jonathan's driver came to pick me up. "Mr. Reed asked me to take you to a special place," he said with a restrained smile. The drive was long. We left the city center and followed simpler roads, lined with bare trees. I had no idea where we were going. Finally, the car stopped in front of a small red brick building. A shelter. On the gate, a worn sign read, "Hope Shelter, founded in 1978." Jonathan was there, waiting, with a coffee in his hand and a look that seemed lost in old memories. "Welcome, Naomi," he said, with a serenity that disconcerted me. "This is where my story began." We went in together. The smell of soup and soap mingled with the laughter of children running through the hallways. The walls were covered with colorful drawings and old photos. He walked slowly, as if revisiting a painful past, lightly touching each frame on the wall. "I grew up here," he said finally. "It was in this shelter that I learned what it means to survive, and what it means to be loved." I looked at him, confused. "Sir, did you live here?" Jonathan nodded. "My mother died when I was 9 years old. I wandered the streets of Cleveland until a woman named Grace found me. She brought me here. She fed me, taught me to read, and, most importantly, taught me about faith." I remained silent, absorbing every word. It was difficult to imagine that powerful man, with his gold watch and impeccable posture, being a lost boy on the streets. "Grace used to tell me something I'll never forget," he continued. "When God wants to change someone's destiny, he starts with the little things: a bowl of soup, a pair of shoes, a conversation." He chuckled softly. "And that's why, when I saw you on that sidewalk, Naomi, I knew." My heart raced. "Did you find out what?" I asked. "I knew you weren't there by chance." I was speechless. Everything inside me seemed confused, a jumble of fear and hope. Jonathan then led me to a small room at the back of the shelter. There was an old black and white photograph there. A white-haired woman, smiling, surrounded by children. He pointed to it. "That's Grace. She passed away many years ago, but everything I am, I owe to her." I saw him kneel before the photo and close his eyes for a few seconds. I promised her that one day I would come back here. And I did. But there is still something I need to do before my time runs out. Those words sounded strange to me. "Your time is running out?" I asked hesitantly. He looked away, took a deep breath, and composed himself. "Later, Naomi. I'll explain later." As we were leaving, a little girl of about 7 ran up to him and hugged his legs. "Mr. Reed," she cried. "Mrs. Mary said you're the man who gives away toys every Christmas." Jonathan smiled and bent down to hug her. "And you're the little girl who distributes them, aren't you?" The scene touched me deeply. There, before me, was not just a rich man. There was someone who knew the value of pain and of generosity. "Naomi," he said, as we got back to the car, "have you ever thought about what you would do if you had everything? Not just money, but power, influence." I looked out the window. "I think it would help people like me. People who just need a chance." He smiled. "That's the answer I was hoping for." The silence that followed was heavy, but peaceful. Until he broke it with something unexpected. "I want to propose something to you. But first I need to test you." "Test it?" I asked, intrigued. "Yes. I want you to come work with me for a week. In my office. Just observing. Nothing more than that." My first impulse was to laugh. "Work with me? You mean at Reed Enterprises? But I haven't even finished high school." "It doesn't matter," he replied firmly. "I don't want diplomas. I want to see what's inside your heart." I didn't know what to say. Fear and excitement fought inside me. It was an impossible opportunity. And yet, something told me there was more behind that invitation than simple charity. Before dropping me off at the hotel, he looked at me seriously. "Naomi, there are times in life when God asks us to take a step into the dark. This is your moment." I stood there, watching the car disappear around the corner, my heart heavy with questions. Who was Jonathan Reed, really? And what did he hope to discover about me? I didn't know it yet, but that test he had proposed would be the beginning of the most painful and revealing part of our story. And deep down, a feeling told me that something dark was about to come to light, something that would change everything I thought I knew about him and about myself. Monday dawned gray, and I felt that even the sky carried the weight of what was about to happen. I put on the simple clothes the hotel had lent me, a white blouse, dress pants that weren't my size, and a pair of worn shoes that I had polished myself the night before. As the elevator ascended, my hands trembled. I was about to enter one of New York's most imposing buildings, and all I had was courage and faith. In that Hall Reed Enterprises it was a world apart. The marble floors reflected the light like mirrors, and the smell of expensive coffee hung in the air. The receptionists, in elegant suits and rehearsed smiles, looked at me strangely. "Can I help you?" one of them asked, politely but distantly. I'm here to see Mr. Reed," I replied, holding the gold card tightly. She raised her eyebrows, doubting. But before she could say anything, Jonathan's voice echoed behind me, "She's with me." He appeared in a dark suit, his navy blue tie perfectly aligned. When he saw me, he smiled. "Ready for the first day?" We climbed together to the top floor. The glass walls offered a panoramic view of the entire city. "Everything you see here, Naomi," he said, "started with a pair of old shoes and a dream." He introduced me to the team. Some greeted me politely, others with a look of suspicion. It was clear that no one understood what a girl like me was doing there. "You're going to spend the week shadowing me," Jonathan explained. "I want you to observe, listen, learn." The first day was a whirlwind. Meetings, phone calls, charts on giant screens, numbers dancing as if speaking a language I didn't understand. In the midst of it all, I watched him, calm, firm, confident. But behind that control, there was something strange. Sometimes, he would stop for a few seconds, stare blankly into space, and take a deep breath, as if fighting something invisible. Late in the afternoon, after everyone had left, he called me into his office. "So, what did you think?" "Impressive," I replied. "But it seems lonely." He chuckled softly. "More than you imagine." We were silent for a while. Then he handed me a brown envelope. "There's a mission inside," he said. "I want you to complete it tomorrow." "Alone?" "Mission?" I asked, confused. "Yes." "Inside is the address of a lady named Margaret Lewis. She works as a volunteer at a nursing home. I want you to spend the day with her. Observe, help, and then tell me how you felt." It seemed too simple, but I accepted. The next day, I went to the indicated nursing home. The building was old, with a smell of lavender and medicine. Margaret greeted me with a welcoming smile. "Ah, so you're the girl Jonathan talks so much about." All that talk. That surprised me. She led me to the courtyard, where a group of elderly people were playing dominoes in the sun. "He comes here every week," she said. "He says this place helps him remember who he is." I spent the day helping serve lunch, combing gray hair, and listening to old stories. A man told me about the war, a woman about the lost love of her youth. And in the midst of it all, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. When the day ended, Margaret looked me in the eyes and said, "Jonathan chose you for a reason, darling. You have a pure heart, and he needs that now more than ever." Those words kept echoing inside me as I walked back to the hotel. When I arrived, Jonathan was waiting for me in the lobby. "So," he asked. "I saw people the world has forgotten," I replied. "But who still have hope." It was beautiful. He smiled. "Exactly what I wanted to hear." "But why, sir? Why this test?" Jonathan stood up slowly, walking to the window. "Because I want to make sure that, when I'm no longer here, someone will continue what I started." I froze. "When you're no longer here, are you going to travel?" He turned away. There was something in his gaze, a wet, restrained glint that hurt to see. Later, "Naomi, it's not time to tell you everything yet." In the following days, the test became more intense. He took me to meetings with politicians, visits to shelters, and encounters with local church leaders. In each place, he allowed me to observe and learn. "It's not about power," he would say. "It's about purpose." But the more I got to know him, the more I noticed the signs. The trembling hands, the discreet pauses to breathe, the distant gazes. Something was wrong. On Friday, late in the afternoon, he asked me to accompany him to an empty chapel inside the building itself. There, before the simple altar, he knelt. "You know, Naomi," he began, "sometimes God gives us just enough time to fix a part of what we've broken." I stood motionless, my heart heavy. "You're ill, aren't you?" He looked up, and for the first time I saw the strong man crumble. "Yes," he confessed with a heavy sigh. "The cancer has returned. And this time there's no cure." I felt tears streaming down my face. He reached out and placed his hand on mine. Now you understand the test. I needed to see if the right heart existed before it was too late. The silence in that chapel seemed sacred. I didn't know what to say. I just closed my eyes and prayed, for him, for me, for everything. When we left, he seemed lighter. The test is over, he said. Now, Naomi, the real purpose begins. Little did I know that what he was about to reveal to me in the coming days would not only change my life, but would place me before the biggest decision I would ever have to make. The following days passed in a whirlwind of emotions that I could barely keep up with. Jonathan seemed like a divided man. On one side, the businessman everyone admired, on the other, the tired human being fighting against his own body. He continued going to work, but now I could see how much it cost him. Sometimes, the color of his face would suddenly pale, and he would disguise it with a smile. I tried not to show how worried I was, but inside me, fear grew like a shadow. Something told me his time was running out, and that there was something he still needed to tell me. One Wednesday morning, he called me into his office early. "Today I want to show you something," he said, his voice hoarser than usual. We took the private elevator to a floor I'd never seen before. The doors opened onto a silent hallway, its walls covered with old photographs, smiling children, schools, hospitals, entire families. "What is this place?" I asked. "It's the heart of Reed Enterprises," he replied. "Few people know that behind all the business side, there's a division called Hope Division. This is where we invest in social projects, shelters, daycare centers, reintegration programs. This is where the legacy truly lives." As we walked, I noticed he was walking slowly, as if each step was heavy. At the end of the corridor, he stopped before a door with the symbol of a dove. "Before you go in, I need you to promise me something," he said. "Promise that you will continue to believe in God, even when the answers don't make sense." I nodded, my heart aching. He opened the door. Inside, there was a room full of folders, paintings, and project models. But what caught my attention the most was a wall covered with photos of me, photos taken without my knowledge. Me, cleaning shoes in the street. Me, helping children. Me, kneeling on the sidewalk, praying silently. "My God!" I whispered. "What is this?" Jonathan took a deep breath. "For over 6 months, Naomi, someone had been telling me about you. A local pastor who saw you every day on that corner of Times Square. He said you had something different, that there was a light in you. So, I sent someone to check it out. That's how I learned your name, your story, and decided to meet you in person." I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. "So you were watching me? Studying me?" "I knew you," he corrected me tenderly. "I wanted to be sure that God was guiding me, not my ego." And he was. My hands were trembling. I didn't know whether to get angry or cry. "But why? Why me?" He approached, his gaze calm but firm. "Because I needed to find someone who remembered who I was, and who had the courage I lost. Naomi, I'm dying. And before I go, I want to leave something in the right hands." My heart started beating faster. "What are you talking about?" "Of a legacy," he said. "Of something greater than any fortune." As he spoke, I realized how weak he was. His hands trembled, sweat dripped down his forehead. "Sir, you need to rest," I said, alarmed. He leaned on the table and smiled weakly. "Not yet. I need you to see something first." He opened a drawer and took out a blue folder. Inside were documents, photographs, and a contract. At the top, I read the title, Naomi Grace Foundation. I froze. "What is this?" "This is the foundation I want to create in honor of your mother," he explained. "She believed that God never abandons the little ones. I want you to lead this project, Naomi. It will be the home, the school, and the hope for hundreds of children living on the streets." Tears came uncontrollably. "This is unbelievable. But why name her after her?" He sat down, exhausted. "Because, even without knowing her, I feel she was the seed of your heart. And because Grace, her name, means grace, and that's exactly what you represent." I was breathless. This revelation hit me like a thunderbolt. Everything made sense now, the test, the invitation, the dinner. It wasn't about charity. It was about continuity. But why did you tell me now? Why not before? I asked. Jonathan looked out the window. Because time is running out. The doctors gave me only a few weeks. And before I leave, I need to make sure someone carries on the mission. I couldn't hold back the tears. You can't give up. There's still hope. There's still treatment. He smiled weakly. Sometimes, the cure isn't for those who stay. It's for those who continue. That phrase stuck in my mind like fire. Before leaving the room, he handed me the folder. Take this home. Read it. Pray. And tell me if you accept it. I left, unable to speak. On the sidewalk, I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside, along with the papers, was a handwritten letter. Naomi, I chose you not for your strength, but for your faith. When the world forgets someone, it is God who remembers. And when he decides to act, he chooses the unlikely. You are one of those miracles. I felt the cold wind hit my face, and I knew my life had changed again. But what I didn't know, what he hadn't yet told me, was that the illness wasn't the only secret Jonathan was hiding. There was something more, something kept silent for decades. And when that truth came to light, it wouldn't just change my life. It would change everything I believed about love, forgiveness, and destiny itself. I returned to the hotel barely able to breathe. The streets seemed wider, the noise of the cars more distant, as if the world had shrunk in the face of what I had just discovered. The blue folder weighed heavily in my hands as if it carried the weight of a new future, a future I wasn't sure I was ready to live. I spent the night awake, reading every line of the documents. There were projects, financial reports, photos of shelters, children's names, everything meticulously organized. At the end of the folder, there was a short, handwritten note. If you accept Naomi, I will be at peace. If you refuse, I promise I will still understand. The tears wouldn't stop falling. I couldn't understand how a man like him, with so much, with all the resources in the world, could choose someone like me for something so grand. Why me, Lord? I whispered, looking at the ceiling. And in silence, I felt God answering me, because her heart is still pure. The next morning, I went to Jonathan's office. He was sitting near the window, his face pale, but with a quiet glint in his eyes. When he saw me come in with a briefcase in my arms, he simply said, "So, you read it." I sat down across from him, my heart racing. I read it. But I still can't understand why me. There are so many people more prepared, more experienced, more worthy. He shook his head slowly. Dignified. Naomi, you were the only person who looked at me as a human being. Not as a billionaire, nor as a charity case. You saw the pain that no one else sees. We were silent for a while. Then he opened the drawer and took out a small, dark wooden box. There's something I need to give you. Inside the box was a small, simple, antique silver cross. It belonged to Grace, he said. The woman who saved me when I was just a boy. She said that when the time came, I should pass it on to someone who had the same heart as her. And I found that person. My hands trembled as he placed the cross in my palm. Jonathan, I can't accept this. Yes, it can, he replied firmly. Because along with this cross comes a mission. He took a deep breath, fighting the pain rising in his chest. Naomi, I want you to take over the foundation. All of it. The projects, the resources, the responsibilities. And more, I want you to carry my name along with it. Reed Institute of Hope, you will be his director, his soul, and his heart. My whole body went cold. This is crazy. I don't know how to manage anything. I haven't even finished high school. He smiled tenderly. You will learn. Knowledge comes with time. But the right heart, that comes from God. I looked at him, confused, scared, touched to my very soul. And what are you going to do? Jonathan looked away, gazing at the city outside. Rest. The treatment isn't working anymore. I have little time left, and I want to spend it watching the seed grow before I leave. Don't talk like that, I pleaded, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. You still have so much to live for. He shook his head. No, Naomi. I've lived through it all. Now I just want to make sure what I've learned doesn't die with me. I stood up and paced the room, nervous. This is a lot of responsibility. What if I fail? What if I do everything wrong? Jonathan also stood up, with effort, and approached. You will fall, yes. You will make mistakes. But you will get up. And every time you do, you will prove that I was right about you. I stood motionless, feeling the weight of those words. He held my hands and squeezed them tightly. Promise you'll accept. I couldn't answer immediately. I closed my eyes and, in silence, said a short prayer. I asked God to guide me, to show me if this was truly His plan. When I opened my eyes, Jonathan was still watching me, and that's when I noticed something different in his face. A look of peace, almost relief. All right, I murmured. I accept. He took a deep breath and, for the first time since I'd met him, smiled from the heart. Then I can leave in peace. My heart raced. Don't say that. It's not death, Naomi. It's a transition. I'm just going back home. That afternoon was long and silent. We talked about life, about faith, about how God writes stories with lines we sometimes don't understand. He told me about his mistakes, the friends he lost, the loves he let slip away because of pride. And, in the end, he said, nothing is worth more than touching a life. Before I left, he handed me a final, sealed folder. Don't open it yet, he said. Only when I'm no longer here. That sent a chill down my spine. Please, don't talk like that. He just smiled, tiredly. Promise you'll open it when the time comes. I nodded, my eyes welling up with tears. I promise. That night, before going to sleep, I placed the silver cross on the nightstand and knelt beside the bed. I prayed as I had never prayed before. I asked for strength, clarity, and courage. But deep down, something told me that the real test hadn't even begun yet. And I was right. Days later, fate would show how harsh God's will can be, and how much love can hurt when it becomes a farewell. That night, the city seemed different. The lights of New York, which had once enchanted me, now seemed cold, distant, as if they knew that something in me had changed. I walked through the streets with a blue briefcase pressed against my chest, as if that piece of paper were, in some way, Jonathan's heart still beating inside me. I had said, yes, I accepted the mission, I accepted the legacy. But as the hours passed, doubt began to whisper in my mind. Who was I to lead something so big? What if it was all a mistake? What if I wasn't strong enough? Back in my small hotel room, I sat in front of the mirror. I saw my own reflection and almost didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. The girl from the sidewalk no longer existed. In her place was someone about to assume a responsibility that could change the fate of hundreds of people. But along with the fear came something I hadn't expected: guilt. Why me and not someone else? I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Why me, Lord? I took the small silver cross that Jonathan had given me and held it tightly. I remembered my mother's words, when God gives you something great, don't run away. He doesn't choose the prepared. He prepares the chosen. And at that moment, I understood that doubt was merely the voice of the enemy trying to lead me away from my purpose. The next morning, I went to visit Jonathan in the hospital. He had been rushed in during the night. When I entered the room, the constant sound of the machines and the smell of medication overwhelmed me. He was pale, but conscious. You came, he said, with a weak smile. Of course I came, I replied, trying to hold back tears. You promised we'd start the institute together. He took a deep breath, fighting back the pain. Sometimes, Naomi, God begins a work in our hands, but finishes it in someone else's. I sat down next to him and held his hand. Don't say that. You're going to get out of here. We're going to do this together. Jonathan looked at the ceiling, as if listening to something coming from afar. You know, I spent my whole life thinking that success was about having more money, more power, more recognition. And now I realize that true success is having peace. And peace, I found it in you. My tears fell onto his hand, but he simply smiled serenely. You have a heart that shines, Naomi. That's what the world needs to see. That afternoon, I returned to the shelter. Hope Shelter, the same place where he had grown up. I entered the small chapel, knelt before the altar, and began to pray. I asked God to show me the right path. "Lord," I whispered, "if this mission is yours, give me strength. But if it is only a test, show me how to serve without fear." Silence was my response for a few seconds, until an elderly lady, who was cleaning the back seats, approached and said softly, "My daughter, it's no coincidence that God brought you here. Sometimes, He places a burden on the right shoulders, even when those shoulders tremble." Those words struck me deeply. I looked at the crucifix ahead and realized that perhaps faith wasn't about understanding, but about trusting. In the following days, I lived through a conflict that seemed to divide me in two. Part of me wanted to run away, to go back to the sidewalk, where life was simple, predictable, where no one expected anything from me. But the other part, the part that God had touched, told me that I couldn't waste the grace I had received. On Friday, I received a call from Jonathan's lawyer. "The foundation will be officially registered tomorrow," he said. "Mr. Reed wants you to be present." My heart raced. It was real. It was happening. The next morning, I put on the same blue dress I'd worn to dinner, the only nice one I had, and went to the office. When I arrived, it was too quiet. Jonathan was lying on a stretcher, being taken to the private infirmary in the building. "He insisted on coming here," a nurse said. "He said he needed to see something before he could rest." I ran up to him. "Jonathan, please, you need to take care of yourself." He slowly opened his eyes and held my hand. "Naomi, promise me something." "Anything," I replied. "Promise that, no matter what happens, you will continue to believe that God has a plan, even when you don't understand why." Tears streamed down her face. "I promise." He smiled. "So you've already passed the final test." A few hours later, he fell asleep. The doctor told me he needed complete rest. I sat there beside his bed, watching the man God had placed in my path, the man who had believed in me more than I believed in myself. Meanwhile, inside the blue folder, was still the letter he had asked me to open only when he left. And although I didn't want to believe it, something inside me already knew, the moment to open it was approaching. The cold wind that passed through the window seemed to whisper an omen, the kind of silence that comes before goodbyes. That Sunday morning seemed sadder than ever. The gray sky poured a light drizzle over Manhattan, and the normally bustling streets were almost empty. I woke up with a heavy heart, without knowing why. Something inside me told me that this day would not be like the others. Shortly after 7 in the morning, the phone rang. It was Jonathan's lawyer. Just hearing his voice made my hands tremble. "Naomi, I'm so sorry." The words came slowly, as if the world had stopped. "Mr. Reed passed away this morning." I don't remember hanging up the phone. I only remember the sound of my own crying echoing through the room, my trembling hands, and the silver cross falling to the floor. It was as if a part of me had been ripped away. I spent hours sitting on the floor, in silence, with the blue folder on my lap. I knew what I needed to do, open the letter he had left. But I couldn't. It felt like opening it would be the same as admitting that he was truly gone. Late in the afternoon, as the sun began to set, I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and opened the envelope. Inside was a long, handwritten letter in Jonathan's elegant calligraphy. And what was inside changed everything I knew about him and about myself. "My dear Naomi, if you're reading this, it's because my journey has come to an end. But don't cry for me. Only cry if one day you stop believing that God still performs miracles. There's something I've never told you, and it's time you knew. Over 40 years ago, before I became the man you knew, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I was young, lost, and scared. I had a child. A girl. Her mother, Grace, was the woman who taught me what love is. I left her before I knew she was pregnant. By the time I found out, it was too late. Naomi, you are that girl." The letter slipped from my hands. The ground seemed to disappear beneath my feet. "Me, his daughter?" The words danced before my teary eyes. No, this can't be true. But I kept reading, with my heart in pieces. "When I first saw you on that sidewalk, I felt something I couldn't explain. A recognition that only God could place in a father's heart. I asked him for a sign before I died, a reminder that my life could still leave something good in the world. And then he sent you to me. Forgive me for not telling you sooner. I wanted you to know me not as the man who made mistakes, but as the man who learned. And now everything I have, every penny, every project, every dream, belongs to you. Not just because it's right, but because that's how God wanted it. Don't live with anger. Live with purpose. And remember, pain passes, but love remains. With all the love a father can have. Jonathan. I screamed. I screamed with anger, with pain, with love. I cried until I had no more tears. Suddenly, everything made sense. The way he looked at me, the care, the faith he saw in me. I was the lost daughter he had waited his whole life to find again. I spent the night wandering the streets, trying to understand what God was doing. Part of me wanted to rebel. Why did he only tell me when it was too late? But another part knew there was purpose even in that. Maybe I needed to forgive first, and then discover who I really was. The next morning, I went to the hospital. His body was still there, surrounded by white flowers. I touched his cold hand and whispered, "I forgive you, Dad." The nurse came closer and put something in my pocket. "He asked me to give this to you." It was a small golden key. He said it would unlock the beginning of everything. Hours later, the lawyer explained it to me. The key was for a safe in the company. Inside were the final foundation documents, signed and ready to be delivered. At the bottom, a handwritten note, Director, Naomi Grace Reed. It was at that moment that I understood the true meaning of legacy. It wasn't about fortune, nor about inheritance. It was about reconciliation. God had transformed a man's mistake into redemption, and the life of a forgotten girl into a miracle. As I left the building, the wind blew strongly and carried away a page from the letter, which was lost in the sky. I looked up and smiled. Thank you, Lord. Thank you for giving me back a father, even if it was only for a while. And at that exact moment, the bell of the shelter's chapel rang. Hope Shelter, it sounded from a distance, as if heaven itself were saying, Amen. But I knew there was still one final step, something I needed to do not as an heiress, nor as a director, but as a daughter. It was time to fulfill the promise. Jonathan's funeral took place on a cold morning, shrouded in one of those silences that only true grief can impose. The sky was covered with heavy clouds, and the wind seemed to carry away the last breath of his presence among us. The ceremony was simple, as he had wanted. No luxury, no grand speeches, just prayers, white flowers, and the distant sound of a children's choir coming from the shelter. Hope Shelter. When the pastor asked someone to say a few words, the world seemed to push me forward. I walked to the altar with trembling hands, holding the silver cross. The people's gaze weighed on me, but inside me there was something greater than fear, a peace I couldn't explain. Jonathan Reed wasn't a perfect man, I began, my voice breaking. But he was a transformed man. God took him off the streets, raised him up, and gave him more than wealth. He gave him a purpose. And that purpose was to love the forgotten. He believed that every lost child deserved a new chance, and today I am living proof of that. People lowered their heads in silence. I knew him as a stranger, I continued. But I lost him like a father. And I learned that God sometimes rebuilds families in ways the world will never understand. I placed the cross on the coffin and whispered, I promise to continue what you started. That afternoon, the lawyer formalized the transfer of the foundation. Reed Institute of Hope, it was officially born, with Grace's name, my mother's, engraved on the facade. When I saw that sign gleaming in the sun, I felt the weight of the mission and the invisible touch of God on my shoulders. Months passed, and the city began to breathe a new rhythm. The Institute building was inaugurated with a grand event. Children ran through the corridors, volunteers sang gentle hymns, and laughter filled the place that had previously known only pain. On the main wall, I hung 2 photos side by side, one of Jonathan, young, with eyes full of hope, and another of my mother, smiling as if she knew a secret that no one else knew. They're finally together, I thought. The following weeks were intense. I worked tirelessly, taking care of every detail, every child, every story. At night, when the building was empty, I would walk through the corridors and listen to the echo of children's laughter, imagining Jonathan there, smiling, saying, You did it. But there was something I still needed to do. Something he couldn't see in his lifetime. I went to the Hope Shelter. the shelter where he had grown up. The children surrounded me with hugs and curiosity. I climbed up to the small chapel, knelt before the same altar where he used to pray as a boy, and left the silver cross there. "Now she's back home," I murmured. "And so am I." I looked at the crucifix and felt a tear fall, but this time it wasn't from sadness. It was from gratitude. I remembered everything I've lived through: the barefoot black girl cleaning shoes in the rain, the stranger who reached out his hand, the faith that sustained me when fear tried to break me. I understood that God never wanted to punish me with pain. He wanted to prepare me for His purpose. Before leaving, I saw a little girl sweeping the floor, her hair tied in a messy ponytail. She looked at me and smiled, the same smile I had years ago. "What's your name?" I asked. "Faith," she replied shyly. She smiled. "A perfect name." I left there with a light heart. Outside, the sun finally broke through the clouds, illuminating the old facade of the shelter. I closed my eyes and felt the wind touch my face. Jonathan's voice echoed in my memory, "The pain passes, Naomi, but the love remains." And in that instant, I understood that fulfilling the promise wasn't about building structures or managing a foundation. It was about carrying on the legacy of forgiveness, faith, and grace, every day, with every gesture. Today, when I walk the streets where I once cleaned shoes, people call me the principal. But deep down, I know I'm still the same girl, just a daughter who decided to believe that God never forgets the little ones. And whenever the rain falls on New York, I look up at the sky and smile. Because I know that up there, among the clouds, my Father is watching, and proudly, He whispers, "You did exactly what I planned." And so ends my story, or rather, the beginning of a new one. A story that was born on the cold sidewalk of Times Square and blossomed under the grace of God. I, Naomi Grace Reed, have learned that destiny is not about luck, it's about faith. That unlikely encounters are heaven's way of changing the course of earth. Today, when I look back, I realize that every tear had a purpose, every pain was a seed. If Jonathan hadn't looked at me with compassion that day, perhaps I would never have known a father's love. But, above all, if God hadn't watched over me, I would never have understood the power of forgiveness. And you? Have you ever experienced something that seemed like a coincidence, but then realized it was God Himself guiding your steps? Have you ever felt that someone came into your life for a reason that only time would explain? Perhaps, at this very moment, there is a Jonathan or a Naomi crossing your path, someone God wants to use to transform your story. Don't ignore the small gestures. Sometimes, the miracle begins with a look, a word, a simple act of kindness. If this story touched your heart, close your eyes for a moment and give thanks. Give thanks for life, for faith, and for all the chances God will still give you to start over. And remember, it's not the size of what you have, but the size of what you give that defines the value of your life. Before we finish, I want to leave you with a prayer. Lord, bless those who are listening to these words. Renew their strength, multiply their faith, and fill their hearts with courage to forgive, to start over, and to trust. May each of us be an instrument of your love. Amen. And please, if this story inspired you, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Not only to support our work, but to continue receiving messages that touch the soul, that remind you that God is still at work, even when everything seems silent. Because, in the end, the greatest wealth is not what we leave in the bank, but what we leave in our hearts.